In soccer, there's a term called streets won't forget, and that term is used to describe players who will forever be remembered for their iconic playing style and skill. They're usually not the obvious top players, but instead players who made their mark on the pitch without having to be the best players. There's perhaps no other player that fits that criteria more in the NBA than Jamal Crawford, a player whose shot making and dribble moves look like something straight out of a And One mixtape. He did everything coaches tell you not to do on the NBA court. He dribbled too much, and when he did, he dribbled near his chest and would try moves that players would only dare to attempt in a local park, and would shoot even if he was 0 for 15 on the night, and it was the most contested shot you've ever witnessed. But all this was the reason why Jamal Crawford was one of the most entertaining players to watch in the NBA. He was one of the most unique players in the league and was one of the players in the league that made the NBA court look like his playground. He also became synonymous with one move in particular, which was his crossover, giving him the nickname J Crossover. And his crossover, which was so quick that the move was one of the deadliest moves in the league, was damn near unstoppable. He's made countless amount of defenders look confused and stumble all over the court. I mean, it makes it seem like the crisp moves "give that boy a map" is a saying created just for Jamal Crawford. His crossover was very versatile, and standing at 6'5" with a 6'10" wingspan with long arms, he could mix it up with a hezzy, a spin move in between the legs and even behind the back. But what was perhaps his most iconic variation was his shake and bake move, where he would go behind the back in one direction and then behind the back in another direction right after. I mean, this move was picture perfect, looking like something straight out of 2K my part. Probably because it was. I remember back in the golden era of 2K, like NBA 2K16 and 17, this move was one of the most entertaining moves to spam and break people's ankles. What was crazy though was the fact that he never practiced any of those moves, and he's never done a dribbling drill around the basketball cones, but rather all his moves were off pure instinct. Dude was just out there coming up with moves on the fly, and this isn't to say he didn't work hard or anything, because even if he didn't practice his moves, he just loved to hoop. His workouts consisted of shoot-arounds and pickup games. He would play in mornings, nights, in leagues, pro-ams, random gyms, and even when he got to the NBA, he would continue playing pickup games against anybody. He would play against high schoolers, college players, and even random people at the gym. And after injuring his ACL when he was 21, he would never go more than 4 days without playing basketball. But the wildest thing was, when he got married, he wouldn't go to no club or have a party, but rather would have his friends like Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and LaMarcus Aldridge and gather them in a gym and just play pickup games all night long. Jamal Crawford's love for basketball started at a young age, as he was born to a father who played basketball at the University of Oregon, with interestingly Kevin Love's dad, and would go on to play overseas. As a kid though, he would be raised by his mom and 2 older sisters in Seattle, and at just 2 years old he would get his first basketball, which he would become obsessed with and dribbled it everywhere. He would have his walls covered with slam pictures and would go to the library to use the computers to watch Allen Iverson crossovers on the internet. By 8th grade, his dad and his grandmother would bring him to live with them in Inglewood, California. At Inglewood, he would befriend the security guard at the Forum, and he would use his friendship to sneak into Lakers games where he would watch them play. But Inglewood wasn't a very nice area. It was filled with gang activities that made Jamal not be able to focus on basketball like he could do in Seattle, so he would come up with an elaborate plan to go back to Seattle. He would bury a suitcase in his backyard, and over the course of weeks, he would fill the suitcase with his things so that he wouldn't be caught. And once his sister sent him a plane ticket to Seattle through mail, he would be able to leave immediately. In Seattle, he would start working at the Key Arena where the Supersonics played, so he could watch them play. He would also start to become one of the best players in the state, and by 16, he would be invited by the Supersonics for an open run, even though he looked like he was 13 years old due to his thin frame at 140 pounds. But this wouldn't scare Jamal Crawford from playing against NBA players, and something special would happen in this game when Jamal Crawford dribbled down in transition and saw 3-time NBA All-Star Detlef Schrempf and would cross him up and break his ankles at half court, and it was so bad that the Supersonics assistant coach Steve Gordon thought he was hurt. At the same age, he would also be invited to the Seattle Pro-Am by Doug Christie, who was playing for the Raptors at the time, who was running the league, to join his team. In the first 4 games, Jamal Crawford barely shot, as Doug Christie was a star of the team, but then Christie would injure his ankle, and from then on, Crawford would lead the team in scoring and even made the All-Star game. And it was at this All-Star game that he came up with his shake and bake move. I'll let him explain it.
See that shake and bake move everybody talks about? I made it up in the All-Star game on fly. I'm coming down, right? Early in the season against one of those guys, I had 2 points against a strong guy overseas. Guy's name was Brian Parker, locking me up, beating me up. So I make the All-Star game, and as fate would have it, it's just me and him. One-on-one in the fast break, I slow down. I'm like, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? It's just me and him. I don't know. I do the move out of instinct. I go lay it up. He goes way over there. I lay it up. Here's a wall. I caught myself because I was going so fast. The crowd loses it.
Once Jamal Crawford graduated, he would join University of Michigan, where he would average 16.6 points and 4.5 assists a game. And after this season, he would declare for the NBA draft. He would interview with the Bulls GM Jerry Krause before the draft, and on the wall of his office, he had a photo of Earl Monroe and Wes Unseld. And Jamal Crawford would recognize this photo, which impressed Jerry Krause, as in his years of interviewing prospects, he was the only one to recognize those players. Interesting enough, after getting picked 8th by the Cavaliers, he would immediately get traded to the Bulls. As he came into the league, Jamal Crawford was one of the skinniest players in the league, large in part due to his diet, because instead of eating a diet that you would expect of a professional athlete, he preferred to eat candy like gummies, Starburst, and Skittles, and drink Gatorade and Capri Sun instead of water. Jamal Crawford would improve year in and year out in the rebuilding Bulls, and by his 4th year he was a starter, averaging 17.3 points, and even had a 50-point game against the Raptors, with 24 of his points coming from the 4th quarter, as the Bulls won in overtime. Although with this increase in usage, he did start to get a bit of a reputation as a chucker, as he shot 38.6% from the field as the Bulls went 23 and 59. He would get traded to another rebuilding team in the New York Knicks after that year, and here he would continue to start, and he would continue to put up shots even when they weren't falling, because that's who Jamal Crawford was. He was a rhythm player, could be cold all night but then out of nowhere get hot. And the best example of this came when they played the Miami Heat in Madison Square Garden, where he would miss his first 4 shots, but then he would make one, then another one, then 3 in a row, then another one, then one more, and then one on top of that. And he was making all types of shots, contested threes, contested mid-range shots, and even hit his shake and bake move. And by the end of the game, he had made 16 shots in a row, scoring 52 points. He would also start to get a knack for 4-point plays down in New York, since he would take even the most contested shots out there that gave him plenty of chances to draw fouls when shooting threes. And by the time he retired, he would become one of the top 4-point playmakers of all time, making 51 4-point plays. He would also continue creating highlight plays through his crossovers, and he would have one of his all-time best shake and bake move here against his former teammate Kirk Heinrich, where he crossed him up and then gather stepped his way into a layup. And that crossover was so quick that it left Kirk Heinrich frozen. I mean, look at this shit, man. How can you defend this? Knicks would struggle in his first season though, and a new head coach Larry Brown would come in, and he would have different plans for Jamal, because he would move him to the bench, where he would become the 6th man, which would be a sign into his future. But after this season, Larry Brown would get fired, and Isaiah Thomas would come in, who would start Jamal Crawford again. In his next 3 seasons, he would continue to start, scoring 20.6 points a game in his last full year there. And a year later, he would get traded to the Golden State Warriors for Al Harrington. And in Golden State, he was an ideal fit for the offense under the coach Don Nelson to do his 3-point shooting and ball handling and his playmaking, as he would average damn near 20 points again, scoring 19.7 points a game, and would have his 3rd 50-point game of his career against the Bobcats, although the Warriors went 29 and 53. And by this point, Jamal Crawford had an epiphany. He realized that while he did score a bunch of points every year, pulling off moves that nobody's seen before, the teams he played on were always one of the worst in the league, and that made him realize he needed to change his mindset. Instead of needing to start every game, he would start to accept coming off the bench, and that's exactly what he would do next season, where he was traded to the Atlanta Hawks, where he would come off the bench and provide scoring as a 6th man. And this led to great success, as he would average almost the same number of points as before, with 18, and would make the playoffs, which was the first time in his career. And he would even win 6th Man of the Year award. He would be a lot more effective off the bench, as he didn't have to worry about traditional guard duties as he did when he was a starter, and instead he had the freedom to solely focus on scoring and having fun on the court. In the next year, the Hawks would make the playoffs again, and after that he would join the Trailblazers for a year, where he would actually lead the league in free throw percentage, shooting 92.7%. And in the next year he would join a new team again with the Clippers, where he would make his most impact in his career with the Lob City Clippers, as he would be the #1 option off the bench and would even close out close games in the 4th quarter, and would become one of the best 6-mans ever, winning 6th Man of the Year twice in his 5 years there. He would also have one of the greatest alley-oops ever, where he went in between the legs mid-air and laid it up for Blake Griffin for the dunk. But the craziest part about this play is that him and Blake Griffin actually talked about this play 6 months before the play even happened. They never practiced the play, but just talked about it once 6 months ago, and then randomly just pulled out that play in game, which just shows you how much of an instincts player Jamal Crawford was. After his time in Los Angeles, he would join Minnesota for a year, and then he would join Phoenix for a year, where he would become the oldest player ever to score more than 50 points in a game at 39 years and 20 days old in a game against the Mavericks, where the Suns were down as much as 31 in the third quarter and would get them back into the game, scoring 12 points in a row. And by the end of the game, he scored 51 points, shooting 60% from the field. He also set another record as he became the first player ever to score 50 plus points in a game with 4 different teams. He would join a new team in the next year, joining the Nets, and he would become the oldest active player in the NBA at 40 years old. And after this year, he would retire, which would cap his 20-year NBA career. Thinking about it, it's crazy that a player who never drank water and ate a bunch of candy and never did any traditional practice drills lasted 20 years in the league while playing like he was a street baller on an NBA court. He provided flavor in a league where players sometimes are afraid to have fun in order to play the right way, and as a result was one of the most entertaining players even though he came off the bench. He was just a guy who loved to hoop. To this day, he stays close to the game as he has done broadcasting work for the NBA and runs the Pro-Am in Seattle that he first played when he was 16 years old. Anyways, if you guys are still watching the video and enjoyed it, I would appreciate if you guys can subscribe. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and if you guys have any other suggestions on players, moments, or topics, anything NBA related, leave them down in the comments.